Hey everyone, I'm Chris. This is Treantmonk's Temple, where knowledge is power. So today we're talking about our 6th level spells. And now that we're talking about 6th level spells, we have a much smaller list because there's no more paladin spells, there's no more ranger spells. This is just the spells of the primary casters. And even primary casters, 6th level spells are something that will always be extremely valuable because unlike previous levels, that single slot for 6th level doesn't increase to 2 slots until you get to 19th level. That means from level 11 through level 18, you only get one 6th level slot, so it better be good. And in a lot of cases, they are really good. In other cases, they let us down big time. So that's why we're having our conversation today, to identify the ones that are the best, the ones that are underrated, the ones that are overrated, and the ones you should just skip. So, let's get started. Hey guys, let's get started today with our worst list. And I want to start with the third worst spell at 6th level, which is Investiture of Wind. So what Investiture of Wind does is it basically gives you a 3rd level effect. That's Fly. Fly is an okay spell, but then it gives you 2 crappy add-ons. The first is ranged weapon attacks get disadvantage against you. I mean, at this level, that's pretty weak, but that's a lot better than the next ability, because the next ability is probably worse than nothing. It gives you the ability to create a 15-foot cube, and creatures within that 15-foot cube make a Constitution saving throw, or they take 2d10 bludgeoning damage, so that's 11 points on average, and they're pushed 10 feet if they're large size or smaller. Well, 15-foot cube is tiny, so you're probably only getting one creature. You could be doing more damage to that creature with a cantrip. You're 11th level. We're already up to the 2nd point where cantrips have moved up. So, you shoot a firebolt. You're doing 3d10. You're doing 2d10 using your action, using this spell, and you're using your concentration as well. So really, you're just getting flight. And keep in mind that if you cast the Fly spell with a 6th level slot, you could have 4 party members flying. This gives you 1, and it doesn't scale at all, and these 2 crappy add-ons, so you should probably just stay far away from this spell. If you want to be able to fly, take Fly. This spell gives you nothing extra that's worth the higher level. So that takes us to our 2nd worst spell at 6th level. And the 2nd worst spell at 6th level, in my opinion, is Move Earth. Now, Move Earth is a spell that takes dirt, sand, or clay and does all kinds of neat and cool things with them. But we're talking about dirt, sand, and clay. Not dungeons, not caverns, not castles, not anywhere where you're likely to be adventuring. Because, it's Dungeons and Dragons. God forbid we should have spells that are usable in a dungeon. That brings us to our worst spell at 6th level. And my choice for the worst spell at 6th level is Circle of Death. Now, Circle of Death does have a large area of effect, but it's essentially just a big fireball using a 6th level slot. It does 8d6 damage, necrotic, save for half. But even worse than a fireball, it is a Constitution saving throw. It's spells like this that make me feel bad for beginning players who are maybe playing a wizard for the first time, and maybe they're playing a necromancer for the first time. And then they look at abilities like the ability Grim Harvest, which is the first ability a necromancer gets. And when they drop a creature down to 0 hit points, using a spell that does damage, they get healing equal to twice the level of the spell. But if the spell is necromancy, they get healing equal to 3 times the levels of the spell. The problem is that the necromancy spells that drop creatures' hit points tend to be really bad. We saw Enervation before, now we see Circle of Death. In pretty much every case, they're better off if they want to do damage just picking the non-necromancy spells, but that ability kind of tricks them into taking these terrible spells to get that much extra healing. And the fact is it's not good healing to begin with. It's not giving you temporary hit points, which means you already have to be wounded before you get any effect. Having played a lot of wizards, I can tell you that you're not going to get a lot of use out of Grim Harvest to begin with. But to pick terrible necromancy spells over decent other blast spells, up to 3 levels higher for an equivalent spell, just so that you can take that much more advantage of Grim Harvest, is a terrible deal. It's really a trap. So let's talk about our best spells. And starting with our third best spell at 6th level, I am going to surprise a few people, but hopefully those who've been listening to me, this is going to make perfect sense. And that choice is Heal. Heal is a 6th level spell that heals 70 hit points of damage. That's over 10 hit points per level. So it's significantly more straight hit point healing damage than we have ever had access to before with a single action. That means in combat, you can take a fighter or a paladin who's just about down, and you can put them back up into comfortable shape. You might not give them all their hit points back, but you'll give them enough back that they're ready to go. And being able to do that without having to turn them into a giant ape, which is frankly, by this level, probably not so much of a buff anymore, is extremely useful and powerful. And therefore, this is a good choice and my third best spell at 6th level. So that brings us to our second best spell at 6th level. Now, when I did my 2nd level video, I excluded a couple spells because I said the amount of play you would get from them really depended on DM interpretation, and one of those spells was Suggestion. But Mass Suggestion has to make my spot for second best spell at 6th level because it's so good that even if your DM doesn't have a generous interpretation for this spell, it's still going to pay you off because it can affect up to 12 creatures and it doesn't use concentration and it lasts for 24 hours. So you just need to make a reasonable suggestion. You can quite often make a reasonable suggestion to at least stop fighting you. How about, we kill lots of monsters, you should stop fighting us and live. To me, that sounds pretty reasonable. If you want to go a step further, how about this? We are a wealthy and successful adventuring party. Why don't you join our team? Again, a suggestion I wouldn't consider to be unreasonable. Now, what your DM considers unreasonable might be different than what I consider, but certainly you can come up with a suggestion to at least have them stop fighting you. And if you can target that many creatures at once, it's going to stick on some of them. Great spell, doesn't use concentration, and at 6th level, we're looking for spells that don't use concentration. So many of the great things spellcasters can do at this level are going to require their concentration. So when you find a great spell that doesn't use concentration, it becomes doubly good. So what spell's even better than Mass Suggestion? In my opinion, that spell is Contingency. Contingency is a spell that wizards get that they can cast with another spell up to 10 days beforehand. So this is something you cast in between adventures, so it's not using your spell slots. And then when a trigger that you set occurs, that spell goes off. So usually what it is it's some kind of hit point range or a command word that you set where some kind of defensive effect comes up. Most commonly, I've heard Dimension Door and Autoluke's Resilient Sphere. What it really means is you have this spellcaster who had the reputation of being super squishy, who is now very, very difficult to kill. Probably the most difficult to kill member of the entire party, and that will never change. And that's because of the spell Contingency. It really changes the game, and it really makes wizards start to feel like archmages. Here's a combination I've heard that is completely legal if you have the Ring of Spell Storing. How about doing a Contingency with Revivify? Because if you have a Ring of Spell Storing, you can set that up. So you die, you're alive. There's a combination for you. Talk about not being squishy anymore. So that's why DMs, be very careful about Rings of Spell Storing. So now let's talk about some underrated spells. And my choice for third most underrated spell at 6th level is hard for me to take because I have to defend a spell that targets a single creature, and if that creature makes its saving throw, nothing happens. These spells, I'm biased against. But one spell of that type that gets low ratings in other guys that I don't think deserves it is Eye Bite. So let's talk a little bit about Eye Bite. So what Eye Bite does is it uses your concentration and it lasts 10 rounds. And each round you can use your action to target a creature. Now it has to be a different creature every round. They make a wisdom saving throw, and then if they fail the wisdom saving throw, you get to pick one of 3 effects. Now one of those effects is Sickened. Sickened sucks. Don't pick Sickened. The other 2 effects are both good. The first one is a Frightened effect. And it's not just the Frightened condition. The Frightened condition would be okay, but it's the Frightened condition plus they have to run away from you using the dash action on their turn. So they're out of the fight. When are they back into the fight? When they can't see you anymore and they're a minimum of 60 feet away. Now there are certain situations, like if there's a door and they can go behind it and maybe get away from you in one turn, they could be back in a turn. But if you're out in an open area or a large room, it might be several turns before this effect disappears and they don't get another saving throw. The second good effect is unconscious, and of course unconscious is great. Unfortunately, they can be roused, so be careful. It really depends on if this is the last creature in the combat, then unconscious is perfect. If this is the first creature in the combat and there's other creatures nearby that might know to rouse them if they fall unconscious, then it's not so good. So it really depends on who you're fighting, whether you should pick the frightened or the unconscious condition. Now this is not a spell I would use in every fight. If I'm fighting one big, really tough guy, this is useless because you can only target him once. And it's basically one of those spells where you target him, and if it works, you win. And if he doesn't work, nothing happens. I don't like these kinds of spells. They're definitely not worth six level slots. I also wouldn't use this spell against a bunch of little weak creatures because you're going to be better off with an area of effect spell. This is really about a few really tough creatures, like 3 to 10 creatures maybe that are of roughly equivalent challenge rating, so they're all reasonably tough. That's when you want to use this. They probably don't all have legendary resistance. That's usually the big bad guy that has that. So you target one each round, and each round you can do something terrible to them. And the value here is using one spell slot, and you might get through the entire combat just using one spell slot. So this is really something that's very useful if you're not fighting the big end fight. So overall, I would say Eye Bite, it's not a perfect spell, but it certainly has its place. It's not an average spell. It's an above average spell for sure. Even though you target one creature and they get a save, technically you're kind of targeting several creatures. It just takes a number of rounds to do so. So that brings us to our second most underrated spell at 6th level. Now my choice for second most underrated spell is Create Homunculus. Create Homunculus is a spell that after Xanathar's I rated, and then I remember seeing lots of comments in the comment guides where people were just kind of taking it as self-evident that this was a joke. This was a spell that no wizard would take. Well, I'll tell you what, I'd take it with my wizard, like that. Now I understand the criticism of this spell. I mean, it's a 6th level spell, and if you compare it to Find Familiar, is it really that much better? No, it's a little bit better, but not a lot better. But then again, it's another familiar, and a better familiar. And who cares that it's a 6th level spell? I'm not casting this while I'm in a dungeon. I'm casting this while I'm in an inn, when I'm not adventuring. This is when I'm not using my 6th level slot anyway, so I might as well cast it on something like this. Now, part of the problem here with the evaluation of this spell is that there's a significant amount of the text that talks about how you can sacrifice your own hit points to give the homunculus more hit points. Oh, that's a terrible idea. Don't ever do that. I don't know why that's included in the spell at all, but I would never touch that in a million years. So why do you even want this at the same time as a Find Familiar? Well, there's a couple reasons. First off, it is a better scout than your familiar. Now, your familiar is a great scout, and it's been a great scout for you for 11 levels, but now Find Homunculus has created a better scout, because this scout doesn't have that 100-foot range. You can share senses with your homunculus anywhere on the same plane. So you can send it anywhere, and you can see through its eyes, you can hear through its ears. That's super useful. The other thing is, it's got hands, which means it can do things like feed your allies a healing potion. That can be ultra useful as well. And keep in mind that you can only have one familiar. So one familiar and one Find Homunculus means 2 extra actions every round. Now they're limited to a certain number of actions, but so what? That's 2 extra actions. There's lots of reasons why you would want to have both a familiar and a homunculus. And by the way, there's material components for this spell, and they say they're consumed, but if you look at how it's written, the ones that are consumed are the free components, and the component, the jewel dagger, that actually costs you, is not consumed. So you can cast a spell over and over again as you need it without having to spend more money on material components. That brings us to our most underrated spell at 6th level. My choice for the most underrated spell at 6th level is Word of Recall. Now, Word of Recall is a cleric spell, and it is a teleport spell. And it's not the best teleport spell for the level, but it's a cleric spell, and that's important because clerics don't really get much in the way of teleport spells. So if you are playing in a group that doesn't have a wizard, and maybe the sorcerer in the group, if there is a sorcerer in the group, focus on blasting instead of teleporting, which is extremely common. You may not have anyone capable of teleportation in your group, but a cleric can take this, and that gives you your escape spell. And I think once we get to this kind of level where sometimes creatures and enemies have abilities that we weren't expecting, take us by surprise, and suddenly take the advantage away from us in combat and have us scrambling, having somebody in your group who can gather the party and get them all out is huge. Okay guys, let's talk about some overrated spells. So before I get to the top three, I want to give an honorable mention to True Seeing. True Seeing is a spell that just about made my overrated list because I think it's so circumstantial and people think it's pretty good. But we're talking about seeing in magical darkness and seeing through illusions and seeing invisible and seeing into the ethereal plane and seeing your secret doors. And all those things can be done by other methods and cheaper methods than using a 6th level slot to achieve it. And they're all circumstantial. So if you're going to have something taking as valuable a slot as a 6th level slot, I know True Seeing is iconic, it's a classic, but it is really circumstantial. It just about made my list for overrated. But it didn't quite, so that's why it gets an honorable mention. Now let's get into our top three. So now let's talk about our top 3 most overrated spells. And my choice for the 3rd most overrated spell, 6th level, is Disintegrate. Now Disintegrate is a spell that promises to do just massive amounts of damage. 10d6 plus 40. That's 75 points of damage with one hit. That's an incredible amount of damage to be doing. And it's force damage. That's the kind of damage that's going to stick. At least it would stick, except they get a dex save, and if they make their dex save, nothing happens. And now we are way too late. This is 6th level spells, so we're at 11th level or higher. Everything that's the big bad guy at this point, the one that we're going to use the showstopper on, is not going to fail that save, or unlikely to fail that save. They very likely have legendary resistance, or at least an amazing dex save. The most recent time I've seen this spell taken and used, it was one of my best friends playing a diviner, and he figured that he could use his portent to make creatures fail their saving throw. So he took Disintegrate. It was his highest level spell. We were 11th level. We went into the big fight, and the big end guy right at the end of the campaign, and he saved his 6th level slot, and then he hit the Disintegrate, then he hit the portent to make him fail his save, and he used his legendary resistance to make the save, and nothing happened, and wow. Disappointed! And that's what this spell does. It disappoints, and that's why it's overrated. It sounds like it's going to be so amazing, and sometimes it sticks, but so often it's not going to stick. So often you think you have the method to make it stick, and then that's going to fall through, and it's just not going to do anything for you. And so for that reason, I think the spell is overrated. So now we get to our 2nd most overrated spell at 6th level. And this one's hard for me because I really wanted to give this spell number 1. Unfortunately, the number 1 is such a runaway, I have to give this spell number 2, but fortunately this spell is a big number 2, so it is kind of fitting. But there has been no spell since I wrote my Wizard Guide for 5th edition that I've had more blowback about than this spell by saying this spell wasn't good. And that spell is Otto's Irresistible Dance. If I go to any other Wizard handbook but the one I wrote, it gets a great rating. Here's what it does. You target one creature. That creature gets disadvantage on dex saves. It gets disadvantage on attack rolls. It can't move, and you get advantage to attack it, and then it gets a wisdom save at the end of every round to get rid of the effect. So as a debuff, it's reasonably good. Not amazing for this level. I mean, we've already seen spells at this level that can make multiple creatures unconscious or panicked and running away. So giving things disadvantage and giving yourself advantage, it's good, but it's not astounding. And we're talking about 1 round until it gets saving throws. Now, the reason people blow back about this is because it doesn't get a save until the end of its first round. So they figure but you have a whole round where it's guaranteed to work. Well, yeah, you get 1 round of a okay debuff with a 6th level slot. That's not very good. 1 round of decent debuff is not enough for a 6th level slot. So I think this spell is hugely overrated. So that brings us to number 1, our most overrated spell, potentially in the entire game, certainly at 6th level. And if you don't know what I'm going to pick, hi, nice to meet you. My name is Treantmonk. This is my channel. You've never heard of me before. I hope you enjoy it. For everybody else, obviously I'm going to pick Tensors Transformation. Tensors Transformation is a spell that a lot of people think is good, and I hate it. I think it's maybe the worst spell ever. This is a spell that takes a wizard of 11th level or higher. They cast it on themselves to take away their ability to cast spells. That's what it does. So this spell that takes away your wizard's ability to cast spells, I can't get over that. But the whole point of that is you're giving that up so that you become really good as a martial character. So what does this do for you to turn your wizard into a martial character? Well, first thing it does is it gives you advantage on attack rolls. Good thing, because you probably aren't attacking with your intelligence. You're probably attacking with your strength or your dexterity. Neither of those are going to be a 20 likely. But you might have a 16 dexterity, so if you're using something like a rapier with advantage, you're going to hit most of the time. It's going to add 2d12 damage to those weapon strikes, and it's going to give you a second attack if you didn't have one already. Now, if you're a Bladesinger, you already had the second attack. But if you're any other kind of wizard, you probably only had 1 attack. So now you have 2. They're both doing 2d12 extra damage. So let's say 2d12 twice plus d8 for a rapier plus 3 from your dexterity. Maybe you have a +2 rapier, so you might have another +2 there. Maybe 45 a round if you hit twice. That's okay. That's not bad damage. I mean, you're doing that much damage with inanimate objects with a 5th level spell, but okay, 45 that's not terrible damage. Now, how about defensively? What does it do for you defensively? Well, it gives you 50 temporary hit points. Now, if I'm a wizard and you throw 50 hit points on top of my wizard hit points, now I'm looking at a hit point that is probably going to be pushing the barbarian for the most number of hit points in the group. That's pretty good. And I'm going to get proficiency in heavy armor and shields. So I can put on, I can slap on plate mail. And then I can put on a shield. And then I can grab my rapier. And then I can go into combat. And now I might have a really good armor class. And I have those, and I'm still going to get hit because, I don't have a shield spell. I'm going to get targeted all the time. But I've got those 50 temporary hit points. And then each time I'm hit, I make a concentration save. And as soon as I fail one...
Oh, gosh. I'm not much on speeches, but it's so gratifying to leave you wallowing in the mess you've made. You're screwed. Thank you. Bye.
So first off, let's just enjoy the moment, okay? Because you know it's happened. You know it's happened because it's in the spell, right? It makes a point in the spell of making you proficient with armor and shields. So somebody's putting them on. And then using concentration to maintain the ability to use them. Just think for a moment how terrible a position you put yourself in. You are in melee. You are wearing armor you are not proficient in. You can no longer cast spells. How many rounds does it take you to get rid of your shield and your armor so that you can actually cast spells again? You've lost all your temporary hit points. You've lost all your martial combat abilities. Now all you have are your spells, which you can no longer use. That is a disaster waiting to happen. There is no way to make a build that makes that a good investment of abilities. Now let's say you're a Bladesinger, and so as a Bladesinger, you're not going to be putting on the armor. So how much are you really getting out of this spell? You're not using the armor proficiency. You're not using the shield proficiency. You're not getting the extra attack every round. And what you're getting is 2d12 damage and advantage. Using your concentration and giving up all your spellcasting ability. Why do people think this is good? There's probably some kind of build that's a multi-class that uses 11 levels of wizard and then something else and then somehow makes this valuable. I just can't imagine 11 levels of wizard where we can't come up with anything better to do. And whew, I do dislike Tensors Transformation a lot. And when I hear people say it's good, I don't know. I don't know. Did you realize its concentration? Did that escape you? Maybe. Take another look at it. And if you're seeing something I'm not seeing, tell me what it is. For me, I think it is poison, and you should absolutely avoid it. So, that's it for 6th level spells. I'm going to sit back now and relax and have some fun, because D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you guys next week.